In what is only the fourth time in United States history, the U.S. House of Representatives have officially drafted articles of impeachment against the president. In this case, Donald Trump is charged with 2 articles of impeachment. He is charged with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Both of these articles are largely tied up with the Ukraine situation. The abuse of power is tied up with using his office, as the Democrats charge, using his office in order to solicit getting dirt on his political opponent, and the obstruction of Congress is related to his denying of subpoenas. In this video, I want to talk specifically about, I want to talk about both articles, but I actually want to focus on the obstruction of Congress because I think we've talked a lot about the Ukraine situation in the media, and I'm sure you are probably largely familiar with that one. The obstruction of Congress one is a little bit more specific, and I want to talk a little bit about it because I think that it relates to important structural issues which our country is facing, and so I want to talk a little bit about those. But first, I want to show you the video of House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler announcing the articles of impeachment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Over the last several months, the investigative committees of the House have been engaged in an impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump's efforts to solicit foreign interference in the 2020 elections, efforts that compromised our national security and threatened the integrity of our elections. Throughout this inquiry, he has attempted to conceal the evidence from Congress and from the American people. Our president holds the ultimate public trust. When he betrays that trust and puts himself before country, he endangers the Constitution, he endangers our democracy, and he endangers our national security. The framers of the Constitution prescribed a clear remedy for presidents who so violate their oath of office. That is the power of impeachment. Today, in service to our duty to the Constitution and to our country, the House Committee on the Judiciary is introducing 2 articles of impeachment charging the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, with committing high crimes and misdemeanors. The first article is for abuse of power. It is an impeachable offense for the President to exercise the powers of his public office to obtain an improper personal benefit while ignoring or injuring the national interest. That is exactly what President Trump did when he solicited and pressured Ukraine to interfere in our 2020 presidential election, thus damaging our national security, undermining the integrity of the next election, and violating his oath to the American people. These actions, moreover, are consistent with President Trump's previous invitations of foreign interference in our 2016 presidential election. And when he was caught, when the House investigated and opened an impeachment inquiry, President Trump engaged in unprecedented, categorical, and indiscriminate defiance of the impeachment inquiry. This gives rise to the second article of impeachment for obstruction of Congress. Here, too, we see a familiar pattern in President Trump's misconduct. A president who declares himself above accountability, above the American people, and above Congress's power of impeachment, which is meant to protect against threats to our democratic institutions, is a president who sees himself as above the law. We must be clear. No one, not even the president, is above the law.
So you just saw there House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler officially announcing the articles of impeachment against the president. I want to show you real quick the general responses which we're seeing from specifically the Republicans. So this is actually from Donald Trump's official campaign Twitter. We see here, for months, Nancy Pelosi said she won't move forward on impeachment because it was too divisive and it needed bipartisan support. Well, it is divisive and only the Democrats are pushing it, but she's doing it anyway. Blah, blah, blah. But the Democrats are putting this on political theater because they don't have a viable candidate for 2020, and they know it. Pretty predictable response, pretty much what you would expect to see from from Donald Trump's campaign Twitter. And if you scroll through the Twitter feed, you see them pretty much talking about the trade deal, USMCA, which Nancy Pelosi, literally within an hour of announcing impeachment, she went over and announced this stuff on the trade deal. Very smart political strategy on her side, because she knows the media won't really be talking about it, because it would have been certainly perceived as a win for Donald Trump, and so it kind of negates that a little bit. But obviously, you can see the campaign pretty much just wants to talk about the trade deal and how great of a thing that is, and they obviously don't want to be talking about the thing on impeachment. Now, if you go to Donald Trump's official Twitter, pretty much what you would expect, calling it a calling it a witch hunt, Nadler, blah blah blah, and trying to talk about the trade deal. Really, the only interesting tweet here is still Donald Trump here saying, "Read the transcript. Us" is a reference to USA, not me. What this is referring to is a new Republican talking point, which you've probably heard over the past few days, but you're definitely going to hear more of. So in the transcript, it specifically says us. It's like, do us a favor. And now Republicans are coming out. Donald Trump clearly there is coming out saying, oh, no. When I say do us a favor, I don't mean me or do my campaign a favor. I mean, do like the country a favor by by investigating the Bidens. I don't think anyone seriously believes that, although I do think that it could be an effective distracting sort of talking point where, if you don't really know the issues, you're kind of like, oh, well, I guess I don't, like, if you didn't read it or you don't know sort of what's going on, you kind of, you have an excuse, I guess. And I think, actually, sadly, I think that it will be a moderately effective effective talking point, at least for an effective talking point for those for whom the talking point is meant to be effective for, which is to say Trump supporters. It's going to be an effective thing that they can just kind of, run through in their mind and kind of allow them to ignore whatever the Democrats have to say. So I said that I largely wanted to focus on the second article, Obstruction of Congress, as opposed to the abuse of power one. And the reason for that is because I think it's more interesting. And second, the abuse of power article, everyone's talking about that one. If you're watching this video, you probably already know the basics. Donald Trump asked the president of Ukraine to, investigate the Bidens, and if he didn't, he was going to hold up $400 million of congressionally approved military aid. And, certainly an impeachable offense, and it's very interesting, but you've heard a lot about that already. And I think that the interesting thing that I want to think about is, for the first 36, literally 36 presidents of this country, there was only one impeachment. One. You could live an entire lifetime and never see a single impeachment. And now, in the past 9 presidents, we've seen 3 impeachments. Literally, in my parents' lifetime, they have seen 3 impeachments. And in my lifetime, there has been 2, although I really only remember 1 because I was a very tiny baby for the Clinton impeachment. But why is it the case? Because clearly it seems that impeachment is both becoming more common and becoming a more partisan affair. And I think, we can actually begin to explore that issue by thinking about the obstruction of Congress charge. So what happened here is basically Donald Trump he is the first president to ever deny every single congressional subpoena. So, Congress wants something in the White House, Donald Trump just says, no, not going to do it, not going to cooperate. And by the way, if you watch my video on the polling for impeachment, you'll see that I argue that I think that this will be a more effective argument for the American people if done correctly. I think that this argument will be more likely to persuade independent voters. But I think we can explore, why is it the case that a democratically elected body, Congress, is able to be literally just ignored and not really have serious public backlash. Donald Trump ignores Congress, and he's able to get away with it, right? His base of supporters aren't leaving him because he's doing that. And I think part of the reason for this is obviously just that Congress's, approval rating is massively underwater. And second, people view Congress as a distinctly partisan institution because we don't think about, right? Like the reason why it can be an article of impeachment is because we're supposed to have separation of powers along three branches of government: the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. But clearly, in our system currently, what we have right now is not this checks and balances between those three branches, but we have sort of checks and balances across branches based on party. So the Republicans in the legislative will check the Democrats in, say, the executive, in the case of the Obama years, or vice versa. But of course, the Republicans now in the legislative are unwilling to check the Republican in the executive. And of course, by the way, it would largely be the same way if it was Democrats, right? Even if, I mean, it would be, it's essentially, it's much, much, much harder. You have to have insurmountable evidence in order to go against your own party because of the fact that if the president gets downed, right, then there's going to be all kinds of down ballot effects for Republicans, and Republicans will likely lose their seats. Democrats will run and say, look, he's a Republican, blah, 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 blah. And it'll end up basically we don't have checks and balances. And part of the reason for that is just that our system really was not designed to have political parties, at least national political parties. You'll remember George Washington famously in his farewell address said, look, we should not have political parties. This is a really bad thing. And the thing is, I was taught in school, I was literally taught this in school, that part of the reason why our country is so great, why America is so great, just is because America has these fantastic institutions. And why do we have great institutions? Because we have a brilliant constitution which has checks and balances. And we could only do that because, our founding fathers were brilliant and, seemingly omniscient. Now, the thing is, yes, our founders were very, very brilliant. If you read the Federalist Papers, in my opinion, the Federalist Papers are a brilliant work of political theory, rivaling even Aristotle's Politics, a brilliant work of political theory in its own right. I'm not denying that. However, the founders were not omniscient. Something that they didn't seem to recognize is both the, future rise of mass media and the possibility of long distance trade, which, for instance, I'll give you an example. So the steel industry, for example, in the United States, U.S. steel dominated the world, which for a long time, precisely because they were able to move steel cheaply, move coal and steel and iron very cheaply across the country, and so we're able to produce steel much cheaper and of higher quality than the rest of the world, at least until Europe developed the coal and steel community, which later evolved into the European Union. Why am I bringing this up? This seems like a distraction. It's not. Part of the reason why our institutions seem so unstable and are so unstable just are these deep structural and institutional issues, such as the development of political parties in a constitution which was not designed to have political parties. And so we have founders who made the assumption specifically that, voters would vote largely along material interests and that those material interests would be geographically bounded, right? Which is why, by the way, when you read the Federalist Papers, when you read the founders, they talk about minority rights. And what do they mean? They mean the rights of small states. And, so we have these institutions and, systems of checks and balances, which are built around an assumption which does not apply to our present economy. And now, look, I don't mean to say that what Donald Trump did, that this, it wouldn't have happened if, our systems were set up differently, et cetera, et cetera. But look, I mean, clearly Donald Trump is an incompetent, and in many ways he really is a strongman. But if we sit and talk about strongmen all day long, it's a waste of time. We need to talk about why are institutions vulnerable to someone who, quite frankly, is so unintelligent that, he misspells half the words he writes. I mean, the guy is clearly like facing some kind of cognitive decline or something, or he's just always been this way. But yet he's able to hijack the Republican Party and have everybody just go along with what he's doing. And there's no real system of checks and balances to fix it. So what I want to, I guess, reach out to you in this video is obviously a little bit different than, what I usually do, or really about, news commentary in general. but I think it's really relevant. We need to ask, why is it the case that impeachment is becoming more and more common? Why is it the case that it's becoming more and more partisan affair? And if we don't do that when we talk about these issues, I think, it doesn't matter ultimately what Donald Trump did. If we don't talk about these structural issues, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump did, because another Donald Trump will just come along and do the same thing, and we'll have another impeachment, and there won't really be any clear and serious mechanisms to get rid of it, because it looks like, it really does, it looks like Donald Trump is just going to get acquitted in the Senate because Republicans control it. So there isn't any serious check on Donald Trump. Whether you agree or don't agree with what happened, I think we can all agree that there is not a serious check on him. We talk about, the House. I mean, why is it the case that we talk about when the Democrats won the House, Donald Trump has a check on him? That's not how it's supposed to work. That should tell us off the bat that we have a problem, and we don't do that. So, I made this video. It's different, but I encourage you to really, take this information maybe and, research on your own, come to your own conclusions, but really think hard and clear about why is it the case that impeachment is becoming more common? Why is it the case that Donald Trump was even able to get away with doing so many stupid things to the point where impeachment, happened? Where were people stopping him? Why weren't people stopping him before this happened? And, we really need to think more clearly about structural issues, because if we don't think clearly about the system and what's going on, we can't even really make sense of the news as it's happening. So there you go. If you like this video, please subscribe, and definitely at least just hit the like button. So do that.